The billionaires that are around these days didn't, they just didn't, especially if they're tech oriented. But the question is that if affluence gets you to a stage in your life where you're comfortable, is there a possibility that maybe the enemy of the best isn't the worst? It's good enough? Now that we're talking about the secret of my success. And I also heard something this week that I thought was very powerful. You want to be successful, it comes down to choices. Making good, strong life choices that aren't based in what's good for you in the moment, or choices that allow you to stay the same way that you are right now continuously over a long period of time. So when you start talking about number of degrees, how big your house is, how many cars do you have? Do you remember when we were kids? Do you have a color TV? Can you imagine like what a low threshold for success that was back in those days? Could your parents afford a $75 color TV instead of a $35 black and white?
I think it's also your upbringing, like you said, because my father truly believes that some of the overnight successes, the biggest uh, billionaires, millionaires, industrialists, must have had lucky breaks. He doesn't necessarily believe that they all really worked very hard and they took extra, like overnight successes that you think were overnight successes, and it took them 12 years to get there.
Or 40 years to get there. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
But he honestly believe, there he would never get a lucky break. He never got a lucky break. He earned whatever he had, but he was never going to be one of them, the rich people. There's us and there's them. So then guess what philosophy he passed on to me, you know.
Here's an interesting thing about that. Jim Collins, in his work in Great by Choice, he talks about return on luck was the determining factor in success, and this is specifically in measurable, companies that perform 10 times better than other similar companies. This is direct apples to apples comparison, and he said that all of those companies had the same instances of luck, so it was how they were prepared to actually leverage the fortunate events and amplify the impact of that. That's what made the difference. So that's an interesting thing because I'm sure if you were to talk to the businesses that failed, they would say that they didn't have that luck, but it's really not that. It's their view and their decisions when the opportunity arose that were different and led to that. Whether it's intentional or unintentional is, you know, neither here nor there. But there, it's so, and that was an interesting thing because for me that was a pretty cool paradigm shift. It's not no one's more lucky than anyone else. It's the opportunity is always there. It's just what we do with it, and what's your view, you know.
It's
Well,
like that saying, the harder I work, the luckier I get, you know? I'm sorry, Jan?
Yeah.
no, I was going to say it's also, well, how many people really fail because they just give up, or
Yep.
and so going along with that, how many people are willing to stick it out and just say, okay, well, this didn't work. I'm going to try this, or and just kind of say, okay, well, didn't work. And I think in the entrepreneurial world, that happens a lot where people, for multiple reasons. The other thing is, I was curious about to ask Lisa what she, or just everybody, based on, and how much of that measure of success is, or just not only your measure of success. And I said based on degrees or status or
Yeah.
however you want to say, may not be financial, but how much of that is also determined by gender. you know, I don't know how old Lisa is, but I grew up and it was kind of like, it had moved out of like, if you stayed home and had a family, it was definitely like you were giving into a model which kind of had begun to die, like which was not fashionable. It wasn't, that's not what you wanted to do. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm not going to stay home and raise kids. Like I'm going to go out and have a career, you know. And so I wonder how much of it also is gender specific, or at least at that time. I think it's actually changed again a lot. But when I was in college, that was a big thing.
Well, I also think that there's been a shifting point on the horizon of what the Klan success target is, and it's been brought about, a lot through mass media, um, advertising, what we see at the movie theaters, what we could buy at Sears. Um, the really interesting part of it is that there's a sobering fact, which is, to borrow Al Gore's terminology, it's very inconvenient and it's true. White people aren't the richest people in the United States per capita. Asian Americans eclipse them by about 40% more of the highest income earners and the highest degrees and then right behind them. And Asian Americans is comprised of first Japanese, then Chinese, Koreans, and Vietnamese. And these are Americans. These are first generation folks whose parents came here and whose shoulders they stood on while those parents made hard choices for their children and set the bar really, really high. And they lived their lives, in many cases, everything for their kids, and then their kids actually respected that and return on luck. The harder they worked, the luckier they got. They have amassed the most amount of fortunes, and then after that are Indian Americans, and then I think white people are like number four in line. And it's a sobering fact when people say that there's something that's given to certain people or a certain sex or certain. I know women that I worked with in the 70s and 80s who were very much aware of the shift that you were talking about, the paradigm shift from the one working person in the house, mom stays at home, raises the kids all the way through high school and college, and then after that, if she wants to go find some fulfillment or something, this might be a person, a really highly intelligent, degreed woman who wound up getting married instead of going into a law practice, or instead of being a doctor, or instead of being a high school teacher or something of that nature. So I'm interested in what were the choice gates, if you will, the yes, I'll do this or no, I won't, that would cause some people to choose the yes, I will go ahead and do this and break out of that traditional, all your friends are doing it type of a thing, to the point where no longer were women staying at home with their children. Most of them, in their 30s were going out trying to start a new career or get a college degree in their 30s and 40s. It's a very interesting time for us to go through. I can't speak from a woman's point of view at all, other than my mother's, who I watched go through this transformation between 1976 and when she passed away in 2012. I'm going to write a book about her one of these days. But if I understand what you're saying, Jan, um, there is an awful lot of that I got to see through the prism of how her life, how I understood and how I absorbed what I saw from her.
Yeah, and I don't know whether like that for me, it never came. It wasn't a family thing. Like it wasn't like my mother was hugely like pro women going out and getting. I think it was much more of a kind of societal kind of flow that I kind of tapped into
Yeah.
for me. And if anything, in my family, it was actually maybe that was part of the reason I did it. It was actually frowned upon. So that might be a whole nother conversation, where like how much do we do because we know, we don't want to be like our parents or whatever, but which would be an interesting conversation. But that, but for me, it was much more, connecting in and just also what I was surrounded by. I mean, I went to college in Manhattan. I was around a lot of, when I started to work, I was around a lot of very successful, very business pro career women. And that was, that was their goal.
Yeah.
That was what they wanted.
You're speaking my language. That's exactly who I was talking about being around in the 80s and 90s. These very, very successful, I mean, like oh my God, successful women in Manhattan.
Exactly.
And, all walks of life. I don't care if we're talking about journalism or fashion or photography or magazine editors, all that sort of thing. It just seemed like there was this unbelievable explosion of a few people who said, "There's no glass ceiling. I don't buy into that. Now let's get busy."
I had
I wonder what it was like for them when they closed the door at night and turned the lights out. Yes, Lisa.
but I fell into what was going on, like exactly what you were saying. My mother went back to work while we were in high school, and I was the oldest of three girls, and we were never told. I never remember feeling like because I was female that there was some, a hurdle that I would have to cross. I know. So my mother gave me a good example of being both a mother and a working woman, and then I didn't want to have a regular job, so I wanted to be creative, and that was the only thing that switched me. But then I still ended up with a job, and then got stuck in and then 40 years went by.
Just like the Pink Floyd song.
So I've also experienced what my niece graduated from UConn, and she doesn't want to be in a 9 to 5, and I don't want to see her in a 9 to 5. And then she just got a job as a 9 to 5er, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid that 40 years is going to pass for her, I just don't want to see that for her. Mhm.
It's kind of interesting, kind of refocusing back to and re-experiencing the two topics that I mentioned, the meaning of life and the secret to my success. I've been listening to some pretty interesting speakers and some people who are sort of taking on the challenge of transforming inner city life and what we've seen in terms of statistics with single family homes, no father being present, in the home, of children in many cases not knowing who their father is, and men who have dozens of children scattered in every major metropolitan area across the entire United States. And what they're saying is that the system, as Ken is fond of saying, is producing the exact result that it is intended to produce, and that those people who have created this problem will not be the ones who can actually solve it. But they said, in terms of changing the structure, that it's really documented across the world that kids who are raised in two-parent homes um, do much better long term and in greater volumes than when in a single family home, especially where that single parent home, where that single parent has to also work and provide for them and leave them on their own a lot. So if you looked at it from the standpoint, they say, of what are the three most valuable things that a kid can do in any family, and the answer is, you may have heard this, but the answer is number one, graduate from high school. Number two, get a job. And number three, have children after you are married and have a partner. You do those three things, life suddenly becomes a lot easier for you to make quantum leaps to whatever might be available after that. And if you look at, in life where most people have been successful, I think there's a pretty good intuitive argument, although I don't have the statistics to back it up, that might be part of the reason in the major groups where people are advancing in technology, advancing in